Welcome to Module 1 of Mobile Photo and Video. Let's dive right in to photo and video theory and just get some of those textbook learns behind us of the things that maybe we think we know, but we don't really know, and hey, we've never actually been taught. So we're going to look at the current landscape. Photo and video does not have to be outsourced to an expert or a paid photographer. In fact, it doesn't have to cost anything at all. We have such incredible devices at our fingertips today on our mobile phones, even our tablets, even the web cameras that we currently have are so much better than they used to be, and they can do so many things that even a DSLR camera in some ways can't compete with. So we've got it at our fingertips. We just need to hone our skills a little bit more. Photo and video trends. What kind of things are elevating the content out there and the visual assets that brands are using to better tell their stories and position their products or services? And how can we take advantage of some of those trends or at least utilize them here and there? 10 rules of composition. These are really important, and these come straight from the photographers around us that have absolutely learned these themselves in years of photography school that we're bringing to you and hopefully showcasing in a way that makes a lot of sense for your social feeds with a few of these composition rules that you can really sink your teeth into. I just know it. And then, of course, ending with some case studies to see which brands have really nailed their photography and video assets and how they're bringing them to life in a way that generates engagement and, of course, conversions so that people are taking the actions they want them to take with the simple, call to action that appears after the video on that visual asset within that Instagram story, etc. So, yes, the current landscape is fun, it's fresh, and it's filled with so many cool devices that have endless potential. The amount of power in our little cameras today compared to the digital cameras of just 5 years ago is unbelievable. So, yes, we have a camera on us at all times. That's pretty remarkable if you think about it. That is a long time coming and maybe something that we never actually imagined. But even a video on yourself, a video camera that's on your person at all times is incredible. So the name of the game is instant, but it doesn't have to be disposable and, in other words, crappy. We have the ability to really stage and set and light and, mic up our shoots properly in order for them to be resounding. Just because they're, fast and furious in terms of the content or the quality and the quantity of photography and visuals that you're creating for your brand doesn't mean that they can't be really powerful and effective in their message. So we know that articles with imagery, we're talking about photography specifically here, articles that include imagery and visual assets are way more resonating and highly compelling than those that don't, and they get shared a whole lot more. Ditto for our social posts. In this case, Facebook posts with images see 2.3 times more engagement than those without. That's a stat from Facebook itself. But we know across every single platform that is the case. We're going to be, if we take our marketing hat off here for a second and we put ourselves in the shoes of the consumer or the audience member or us, the general public, of course we're drawn in to the visual side of the things that we consume on the internet today. So articles, posts, blogs, e-newsletters, anything that you're being served up from a company is going to go a whole lot further and catch your eye a whole lot faster if it's got a visual aspect to it. Video, 92% of users are watching video on mobile and will share it with others. That is unbelievable. If we think about how much we're sending somebody a TikTok link, or we're saving a video in our Facebook feed and sending it along to a friend. It is the point of social video. How digestible, accessible, and shareable can we possibly make it so that it starts to scale? It's not just reaching people on a one-to-one basis. We are now having them do our homework for us, where they are using their feeds and their direct messages and their apps to send it along and share it far and wide. And before you know it, our TikTok video has 1.1 million views, and we can hardly believe it. 64% of consumers will make a purchase after watching a branded video on social. Viewers retain so much more of a message when they watch it in a video compared to just reading it in a text. And we relate to all of these stats, I'm sure, because we do these very same things. In fact, we know as well that a website is 53 times more likely to reach page 1 on Google if it includes video, because it's just that much more watched, thus clicked on, acted on. If we're sent off to a website where that video is embedded, the dwell time of that website and that page in particular is raised, and thus that's a ranking factor in Google's eyes. So it affects and increases our overall search optimization, which is pretty amazing. Photo and video trends that can elevate and bring our brand image to life. Let's look at a few. First of all, what we like to call cohesive color. You've probably seen this in some of the brands, influencers, or maybe individuals that you follow, where they're using sometimes an ombre effect of color, where one color bleeds into the next, maybe 9 photos at a time. So that 9 grid has a certain look and feel to it, and then the one below it does too, or it's just kind of always shifting and changing, but slowly, not image by image, but over time. Or perhaps the color comes in with a theme. Is it a monthly theme that brand is employing? Is it a season? Is it some kind of campaign that they're running and their feed becomes a wash in a certain tone or shade or series of colors? In this case, we can see that really maroony red is popping, or that fuchsia color, and that they've purposely chosen to shoot in that color in this season during this campaign, or to go and select stock photography to fill the gaps, or maybe a color filter to keep it on color and push that trend forward. Multi-photo, we see this sometimes sparingly used with certain brands, or some subscribe to it all the time, where they're using certain apps, or maybe they're designing this separately in Canva or Adobe Illustrator or InDesign, where they're layering photos on each other and they're creating an entire scene and then splicing the photo into a 9 grid and adding them one by one with the idea, or maybe they're adding them 3 at a time so that it always stays cohesive, with the idea that they're telling a bigger story and there's a bigger picture here. So it's very artful, and it's pretty cool to see it all in one shot, but every single photo could stand alone if necessary, which goes without saying as important, because that's how we see things in our feed. One photo might catch the algorithm and stick around for a while, not 9. And sometimes it looks really choppy if that doesn't happen. If one photo that's the top left of this multi-photo 9-piece image set is random and blank and doesn't make any sense and has a really crappy caption, you're like, what is this? What are you trying to do here? So we have to use this carefully, but it can be really powerful if done well. Here's an example of a blogger out of Vancouver, Bethany, who loves to do these little pops of series photos. So while every once in a while, it's not all the time, she'll have individual photos, but every once in a while, maybe when she's working with a brand or she's promoting a product, she'll showcase or publish 3 photos at a time and ensure that they all line up. So it takes some careful planning, but one of the things that's really neat that happens here is we get the sense of motion. On first glance, you might think, oh my God, do we really need to see 3 angles of your face? But I think the secondary feeling here is like, oh wow, I feel like I'm seeing a series of emotions, or that you're moving through the photo, and that's really quite cool. Especially if she's showcasing a product. Maybe she's partnering with those earrings in the bottom grid and or the bottom sequence, and she wants to show them from different angles or in different light or different activities or motions or whatever. So it's kind of a neat way to do it. Similarly, same blogger is implementing the third trend of hand-drawn elements on a photo. So now we're combining real with graphic. If you recall, in the graphic design course, we talked about how graphics and graphic design illustrations and digital elements are so important to pop into our feeds and mix up the kind of consistent flow of original imagery or stock imagery, but of images, photography. We're now adding in graphics to break it up. Well, in this case, we're combining the two, which is really neat. It also serves the purpose of drawing our eye towards a certain aspect of that photo or of that illustration or whatever it is. So people are using it in all different elements, but it's kind of a fun artistic way to showcase an otherwise simple image or complicated image too. Photo presets. You've probably heard of the word preset. If you haven't, it's just a fancy word for filter that really is utilized in Adobe. So we'll get to that, and we'll look at Lightroom, which is their photo editing app, which is pretty incredible, and they call them presets there, that we can import our own type of photo filter. Maybe you've created one yourself, or you've purchased one that has a certain set of levels on brightness, saturation, contrast, all the different aspects that make up a photo editing or photo filter, and combine them into a preset. So in this case, we're seeing a brand. Maybe they are or are not using a sophisticated filter. They might just be simply aiming for black and white photography with little pops of color. As you can see there, it kind of breaks up the photo with just a tiny bit of color, but pretty desaturated. And maybe they're just doing that right in their Instagram app with the simple filters we can use in Instagram. Otherwise, they might be actually implementing a sophisticated preset. Jillian Harris is classic for presets. So her feed is on the left, Simply Susie on the right, a pair of BC bloggers. And Jillian Harris also sells her photo presets, which isn't all that surprising since she has a pretty big digital empire now of products and services and courses and whatnots, also known as The Bachelorette, if you don't know Jillian Harris. But she will show her presets. If you want to download the preset kit for $14 or $49, she'll show the before and after. And generally, the before is darker, not as crisp, certainly not light, bright, and airy, which is her look, her brand. And if you want to emulate that in your own photos, get the preset pack, and ta-da, your photos kind of have that same look. Whereas Susie on the right is a little bit more gritty, darker imagery, just like her. She's not dark, but her brand is a little more real, I would dare say, a little more adventurous and saturated. And so too are her photos, and they just feel a little bit more natural, to be honest. But take note in your travels where you see presets being utilized. Some brands use them heavily, and others you can't really notice. It just feels like their photos are great. That's the idea, that we're utilizing filters and presets to bring to life the best possible image that we can, and to apply some consistency to the photography and imagery being used across our brand, not just across our social feeds, but the images on our website, the images in our blog, our e-newsletter, etc. We want to put forth a consistent look and feel, not polished and perfect, but just consistent and on brand. Next up, vintage effects. We see this used here and there by certain brands like crazy, and certain celebrities or influencers that really love to play around with this stuff. And not just vintage effects, but other photo overlay effects, especially in things like Instagram stories and Instagram reels, where we can apply these really cool effects that go beyond a filter. In this case, we're looking at one on the left that really makes it look like an old grainy, it's probably 1990s, but really it feels like the 60s video or VCR playback. And on the right, same thing. We've got this overlay or this vintage effect that actually turns it into something that looks like a DVD or a VCR kind of camcorder. Taylor Swift there on the left has implemented or overlaid a filter that has more to it than, again, just color. It totally changes the photo. You've seen this if you've ever played around in Snapchat. The filters take over the entire image and they can be really fun. In this case, we're adding some stars and a look almost of like crushed paper or a poster. And then the trees that really get transformed, almost making it look like there's been a double exposure. So just kind of fun. Playing around with filters can really, add some variety and interest to your feed, which is always what we're aiming for. Likewise with the gal on the right, instead of just posting a babe photo, she's added in some film strip to make it look like it's alive or part of a movie or whatever it is, whatever she's going for. It's got a little carousel image there on the right. So we know this was part of a series. So what a cool way to present a series, especially if she had turned that film strip look and feel sideways, and you'd be encouraged to slide through, and it would almost feel like looking at still images of a movie, just thanks to that little graphic element on the side. Silent videos, aka the way 85% of us watch videos on the internet. Believe it or not. And this is why your social feeds start by default with the sound off, and you have to turn it on, because people hate scrolling through a feed and suddenly getting attacked by sound in the video that appears somewhere embedded in their feed four spots down from the still image that they've been viewing. So, and you know, just straight up for privacy or sound and disruption of those around you, or watching videos at work, or all the reasons that we don't want to have sound blasting in our faces. Some of us never turn on the sound. Ask your friends. You'll be surprised at how many people are like, yeah, never. I haven't turned the sound on in a long time. And if a video isn't subtitled, forget it. I don't watch it. That's why we're now seeing auto subtitling come into the video players on our social channels. They know that this is how we're watching videos, without sound, and thus they're trying to help creators and brands and anyone posting video to their platform to subtitle really easily with the help of AI. We'll look at some subtitling and captioning tools at the end of this course. But for what we can do now is, you know, utilize some text overlay in some of our videos, and any kind of captioning that maybe isn't word for word verbatim scripting of your video, but it does pull out certain sound bites or certain headlines for people to just see and hang on to. And if then they want to go back and watch the entire thing with sound, what a great way to have been teed up or to tease them into doing so. So Gary Vee is classic for creating meme-looking videos that have a big chunk of blocky text over top of them, on the top or the bottom or both, but he'll caption just the highlights of his videos sometimes, so you could really watch it without sound and get the gist of it. Meanwhile, Warby Parker on the right is doing, I mean, this could be an ad. It could be used in Snapchat. It could be used in Instagram Reels. They've created a short and sweet ad that has captions over top of it, or I should say little caption headlines. And we're able to see the entire video with just a few words, 20 words total, that start out with 4 ways. So we know we're not going to be overwhelmed by it. It's worth our time to watch, and we can watch it without sound and learn a lot. Short and sweet videos. Oh dear, it's unavailable in this view, but it is a really neat video that was done by Dove, and it was a 15-second video where they partnered with Getty Images to say, how do you see yourself? And so, you know, it was just very, very quick. How come I'm not represented in your photos by women who were, you know, one gal's in a wheelchair, a dark woman, a light woman, a short, larger, whatever, all different faces saying, why aren't we represented? And then at the end, it shows Dove's hashtag, show us who you want to see more of. And then, you know, the Getty Images logo as well as Dove, really cool. So short and sweet videos, here's one that hopefully will work. This one, a hotel, I'll let you watch it.
Great for sleep.
So short. So talk about a perfect YouTube pre-roll ad or mid-roll ad that appears in the middle of your YouTube viewing pleasure or in the middle of your Instagram feed that's not a 30-second ad. If you look at your video stats on your social feeds for both your paid and your organic content, if you're running any kind of video of any kind, any video content, you'll see probably that the average view time is 3 seconds or less. People scroll by it, they see it start to autoplay, maybe they got the gist of it, or maybe they didn't stop at all the more reason for us to not bury the good stuff 10 seconds into our video. But they're wanting it to be micro-sized, and an ad that's a micro-sized video could get a lot of airtime and a lot of punch. So we've started out with a big piece of text over top of the video, bad room for wrecking rockers, interesting. And they've
Bad for homeworking rockers, great for sleep.
They've shown what they're about. Road lodges, get a good sleep. It's perfect. So short and sweet, get to the point, micro video can go a long way. All right, let's talk about the 10 rules of composition, specifically for photos. Some of this will bleed into video, but really what we want to think about when composing any kind of photo, even your family Christmas photo, but more so the photos that you know will make up that bank of photo imagery that we talked a lot about in graphic design that we need to have on hand for easy access in our Canva account when we're going to create next month's visual assets, graphics, photography, covers, etc. So we want to follow a few basic guidelines. Number one, focal point. How is it that you are utilizing different aspects within the photo and within your environment or your photo set that are drawing our eye to something specific? Not only is this photo being taken from an incredible angle, which we'll get to, but we're seeing her in that that pink circle, and then on top of that there is a shadow. Beyond the shadow, she's looking towards the shadow or whatever that item is. There's so much going on here that draws us in and then draws us in even more to wonder what she's looking at. I just love it. How can you utilize certain things in a photo that draw the viewer to exactly what you want them to see, and then ideally what you want them to see next? Things like a hand, obviously it's lit, there's shadowing all around. We know that this is where our eye is supposed to go. It's not perfectly centered, but it's bright, it's clear and crisp, it's making a fantastic shape. You know, it just makes us feel curiosity as to what it's about because it's such a beautiful looking image or element. The gal on the right, there's a lot to look at here as well. But her eye, that yellow around her eye, like why and how cool the way it's done. I'm looking at both eyes because I'm human and I'm drawn to people, humans, faces. But that focal point being that makeup or that color and the vibrancy of the photo, which is so unique. Likewise, leading lines draw us somewhere. They tell us where to go. Maybe it's telling a story, or it's the opening sequence or series of a carousel or a photo set or of a video or something that is basically leading us down a page or a path towards something else, which is really quite cool. Just done in other ways, you know, these plants lined up in a row, not perfectly symmetrical or in focus, but it takes us down towards the back photo because of the way that they're set up, and they're so similar, and they get smaller, of course. Another version of a path, or you know, just essentially a photo that has movement to it because of the way it's guiding us down or towards something or off a page. The rule of thirds, you've probably heard of this one. Most of our camera apps will have the ability to add grid lines to it. And what these are meant to do is help break our photo into thirds, both vertically and horizontally. And then where we want to put our items of focus, our focal points, is within those intersections of those grid lines. So you can see here, Jamie is in the bottom third and left third of the photo, and she's right on the intersection of those lines, which is super cool, because if she's dead center every time, then that's just not, you know, it looks boring. It's the same with when you're hanging a photo on the wall. If you put it a little bit offset or it's not perfectly symmetrical, it just has more appeal, more artistry to it. And in this case, we're able to see more around her, but we're drawn into her because that's what happens on those intersection points. The gal on the left here, you know, the fact that her whole body is in the frame, slightly off-centered, but there's some white space over her shoulder and her hands are taking us up there to showcase her new manicure and her nails is incredible. It's just vibrant and neat because we can't see her whole face and we don't need to. She's looking away, but her hands are here and it draws us right there, and it's on that intersection point. Same with the parrot on the right. So much color and vibrancy, lots of white space and breathing room around him. But that beak or the eyeball, there's just a number of elements that aren't quite centered here, which make the photo really beautiful and not much more interesting. The fact that he's totally offset, his head crosses into one of those top lines as well. Similarly, balancing elements. So while we have, the ability to pack a photo with all sorts of really cool elements that maybe we want to set off to be on those intersecting points to fall into the rule of thirds, that's great. But what if we do need to add something back into the space around? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. In this case, the leash of the dog leads us back that way to wonder what's over there. It adds more context. Without that leash, we might think he's staring at a bird, but we know now that there's someone there or something there and that he's got emotion for whatever that is. It's a happy face on him. Similarly, you've got this guy on the tennis court here that's laying, really kind of interesting that he's laying horizontally across one of those intersecting lines in the top third-ish of the photo. And there could be a lot of space around that photo, or around his body, I should say, in the photo, and that could be just fine. But the fact that they've added the tennis racket and the balls to the photo, and there's that line behind him, it just adds some balancing elements to the photo and make it that much more interesting. If this was just a court with no sand and line and, tennis racket, it'd be a bit boring. It'd be a dude laying on a green field and we'd be drawn to like his pants, but instead it's the whole kind of thing. His pants, his shirt, whatever you might be drawn to. On the right, the coffee, same kind of thing. It would work, but it's even cooler that there's other funky pieces of elements happening in this photo, from her beautiful watch band to the fingers to the eyeglasses. There's just more going on without it being overwhelming. The photo feels more balanced. Symmetry and patterns. My gosh, if you are in Europe or you're in, an architectural, in the realm of an architectural wonder, you see symmetry and you just can't help but want to take a photo of it. When it's done well, especially in larger items like big buildings or big structures, it is just such a cool thing to utilize in your photography. It's an amazing way to add in your own balancing element, like the shoes in this photo. Jamie took this standing on a really beautiful tile floor that she loved and then brought her shoes into it. So we can see the focal point, we can see the angle or the viewpoint, and just in general, this like really cool pattern of color and texture and all the rest of it. So looking for this in your own environment, thinking about ways you can implement it in your own feeds or visual assets. It can also be really busy, so use it maybe sparingly if you need to. Hard to add text over top of something this busy without washing it out like people like to do and making it really light. We try not to do that. We want to have photos that maintain their richness. You can filter it or turn it black and white, but making it just so washed out is never the right answer, or generally not. So where, can you use something like this? That photo in that airport, I think it is so cool because of the grid of that window behind those frames. It turns into a really interesting photo, especially with the reflection. Likewise with all the lanterns, similar but different, but creating pattern. Number 5 in our rules of composition is depth. And it goes without saying that adding depth to any kind of scene is a beautiful thing. When you're standing on a mountain like this and you're looking across multiple mountainscapes or fields and faraway places, it feels beautiful. And what happens, unfortunately, is often when we put our camera to it, it takes away some of that depth. That's just not captured really, really well in our cameras. So how can you add it back in? I mean, this photo is still really beautiful and we can see so much of foreground, midground, background elements here, which is really cool. But sometimes we may have to manufacture this in our photos a little bit. Maybe using multiple elements of your craft beer cans that show that some of them trail off or that there is some depth of field to your photo. Cameras are, amazingly good at capturing more than they used to, especially when it comes to background, which we'll talk about in a minute. But how can you also, maintain some of the depth that does exist in nature and can be lost in photography? I love this picture on the left where the gal is holding up her hand and that frame. So we know for sure that there's depth to this photo. We know why the background is blurred and what she's trying to do here with that really cool looking little Instagram frame. But it just creates such interest to the photo because she's so in the foreground and that's so farther behind. Meanwhile, the picture on the right where we can see the man in the foreground, the plane in the mid, and way off those misty mountains in the background. We have a lot of depth and a lot of interest in this photo. We've got leading lines and, the rule of thirds. It's a beautiful image as a result. And the fact that he's looking away takes our eye towards the plane as well. Framing, speaking of, how can you utilize framing elements in your photography that is another tool to draw the viewer's eye to where you want it to go? In this case, we've got, I think, let's call it Mount Fuji there. Mount Robson, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the one in Washington and it's escaping me. So if we have a mountain and we need to add some context around it or some more visual interest, wow, what a fantastic way to do that with that tree that now shows there's red leaves. Maybe it's fall. Oh, I see some canoes in the foreground. So this could very well be a lake. The sun setting on the right to create the illusion of evening or whatever it is. There's just so many more pieces here that have framed the photo with not just, a place to send my eye, but also context around the image itself, which is really quite cool. So framing your photo, setting it up in a way that makes it more unique, especially if you're capturing something that's common or frequently photographed, and then just adding different visual elements to it for a different point of view. And again, more context. We know we can find, framing within archways, doorways, all sorts of things in nature or in our lived environment. But how can we create it with something like a lamp that is lighting up that little pot below it? And so again, it's framing the photo in a way that draws our eye and adds interest to that image and of course to the icon or the product or item that we're trying to showcase. Cropping, one of my favorites. A photographer said to me years ago, don't pre-crop, don't switch to square on your camera or narrow in too tight because you want to capture as much as you can and then move that photo around into the crop that you need it to be when you're editing it after the fact and narrow in or zoom in tight on some of those elements. And now your photo can be used 5 different ways or times over because you've got this really rich photo that then you can play with after the fact. And cropping is a powerful tool because of all the reasons we're talking about, just focal point and alignment and framing, everything that we can do when we crop an image that gives us room for text to the left or the right, or it adds, real texture and close-up context to that photo, which doesn't happen if we're too far away. So don't be afraid to zoom in and crop. Thinking about how far away that image of that spaghetti could have been, and instead by cropping or at least getting in tight, we feel like we're right in it. I feel like I can taste that pasta and that incredible dish. And then the rest kind of disappears in the background. Same thing with the gal here who's clearly in fitness and she's working out, and we're seeing mostly probably a focused shot on some kind of technology piece or app or solution. They've purposely cut out her head. We're not distracted by her face, sadly. We are focused on whatever it is she's holding in her hand or about to do. So lots of different ways to go about this, but it sure does frame the photo or suggest a different focal point when we do crop specific items. Background. So, as our iPhones have advanced over the years, we've seen a huge improvement on our ability to remove or blur or just affect the background, especially with portrait mode, as we see in this iPhone photo here. And you can do this not just in iPhones, but of course with Androids and, other devices. There are similar abilities to really now capture background in the ways we want it to, either really crisp or blurred out so that the fellow in the front or the focal point just pops so crisply and beautifully. And it feels more like real life where things in the background are blurred. When you think about a photo like the one of the cat, there's almost competing backgrounds happening here because the background is quite interesting and it's got levels and layers to it. It feels like a bit of art. And the way that the cat is hanging over that little fence makes us wonder what is in the background. So it's it tells a bit of a story. The one on the right is also interesting because we've got competing background and foreground with two massively bold patterns and a face in the middle that also, tells such a story and creates such curiosity. So does it work? Well, you might think so, you might not. It's, personal, objective or subjective opinion, but I think it does work in the sense that both patterns are so bold in the back and the foreground, and they're different levels of crispness or focus, and that the photo and the face in the middle is actually the balancing element there that kind of grounds the entire photo, which is so beautiful. Next up, viewpoint. This is something that sounds so basic but is so commonly overlooked. We don't think about the point of view that we're taking our imagery or our photos from in the most clever way possible sometimes. And, we might do a flat lay here and there taken from above of some items on a page or on a surface, but we don't often do this with larger scenery or elements like, for example, this shot. You think about the photo that everybody's capturing from the back of that truck of this marathon runner, and then you think of the photo taken from above and just how cool and different that looks. It's like she's lifting off the ground. Same with this one, the guy on the left, and we're not sure what he's doing, but let's say he's dancing or he's, selling shoes or who knows. But, we can imagine that the photographer is lying on the carpet, looking slightly upwards just to capture it from a different perspective that literally does give the feeling like he's lifting or he's flying or floating because of that point of view being a little bit below him, which is really quite neat. And then same with the one on the right, just such a beautiful point of view and so much white space that people don't even look real. It's obviously overexposed so that we're getting a little bit of movement in there and people are blurred, but just different and such a cool photo that probably hasn't been seen like this in this space before or shot like that. And then finally, despite all of these rules that we're covering, please don't discount and count out the idea of experimentation and getting really creative with what you're doing, because this is where the magic happens. This is where brands become standouts and talked about and shared and stopped and looked at because something is spectacular and it's not what everybody else is doing. And you have the ability to do this in your photography. Just look up, look from the side, climb on a chair, look around, ask people to take part in your photo, do something different, and experiment with what you can do in and outside the confines of your brand and your current photography standards or, efforts. And thinking about this in a way that's always evolving along with, your creativity, your campaigns, and your audience's expectations for creativity and interest. So these guidelines apply to traditional or DSLR or digital photography as well as mobile photos. If you've got a big, beautiful camera with, professional lenses, great. Of course, these same rules can be implemented there as well. But we're really trying to see our mobile photography as a little bit less, less sophisticated than it can be and less interesting. So try applying these rules in different aspects. Try applying it to the square format that you're utilizing in your Instagram feed or in your Instagram Reels and some of that vertical video content. We're going to talk a lot about video in Module 3, but there's all sorts of ways that we can implement these composition rules and other trending photography ideas. So finally, think about it online. Consider how each platform might demand something a little different. Does, Your TikTok feed requires stuff that's done from a totally different point of view or in a really tight format, yes. Maybe with some captions and overlays, unlike the photography that you're utilizing on your blog, which is going to, require a little bit more professionalism or whatever. So thinking about the platform and working back from there, and we'll continue to talk about that as we go through this course as well. One final thing here, this idea of context. I mentioned it a few times a few minutes ago, but asking yourself if the photo has context and if it makes sense to people in your feed or in your e-newsletter or whatever you're showcasing. What is it? Asparagus? No, I can't think of the word. Oh dear. It's got so much more context all of a sudden because it's got a hand in it holding them. Those florets, we'll call them. Brussels sprouts? Oh dear. I've always known this thing and now it's escaping me. So if you have something that you can insert into that photo that makes it just make more sense, that's going to help you out a lot. Remember, with visual assets like photography, we are telling stories without words and without sound and without, in most cases, human contact. So it doesn't have to be overtold and spelled out explicitly, but a little bit of context can go a long way. Okay, strong visual content that utilizes different styles of photography and video. Let's look at some brands that are nailing it. Humans of New York. We include this because it is a brand and an Instagram feed, but just a social media platform or account that has been so renowned for so long with more than 10 million followers. And, the writer and now writers have just done such a beautiful job of storytelling globally. They'll go find the most incredible people around the world and bring us into their story. And it starts with a photo, but then the caption just hits it home and really tells it and sells it. But so beautiful. The photos aren't perfect, but they sure do have a way of getting right to the heart of that person's story. And sure enough, as I said, the caption and the text elements just it seems to complement the photography, which is really cool. Charity Water, I talk about often for different reasons. It's my favorite nonprofit, I think, at least, dare I say, from a marketing perspective, but also from a brand and just purpose. They are bringing clean water initiatives to developing countries and have a really, really incredible operations model too, where 100% of the funds donated go towards the clean water projects. And then they have an operations budget that's funded separately. So there's so much about them that's really, really cool. But if we look at them as with our marketing hat on, we notice that people are always smiling in their photos. That's just like their mandate. It's a decision the brand has made, or the organization, to not feature sad, downtrodden humans. They are showing the end result, as we always talk about, the transformation. What happens when people work with them is this. They're not necessarily showing pipes and ditches and diggers and wells. Sometimes they are, but they're showing the people that benefit from those wells because, again, we are drawn to people and humans and stories and things that evoke emotion. And I'm going to feel a lot more emotion from a smiling child drinking clean water than I am from a bulldozer, digging or cracking a well open. So the other aspects of their photography beyond the smiling faces is the color, the vibrancy, the light, and then the yellow. So we see the yellow water jug, which is their icon. It's also part of their logo. We see it appear regularly through their photos and then also sometimes strategically added to the photos. So it's this really neat, almost like Where's Waldo element to their brand. And I encourage you, as we talked about in DIY graphic design, the last course, that if you can find an icon or an element to regularly place throughout your content, it's again just another form of recognition or a word mark that we can recognize and relate to right away and assign to you and your brand. Camp Brand Goods, local or Calgary-based company that has, I talk about them often as well for a lot of reasons. Primarily their user-generated content that they've achieved, where if you set the stage, they will engage. meaning that they have created this aspirational, inspirational lifestyle brand for us users to ogle at. And then when we are out there living that same kind of life or day or camping trip, we might feel compelled to snap similar types of aspirational imagery of nature and living in it and tag them in the photo or utilize their hashtags. And then camp will use it in their marketing perhaps, or take advantage of that post and share it. So the other thing here is that we're not seeing much product. You see in the top left, there's a t-shirt, so just a tiny bit of apparel, like one photo that I can really explicitly say is product forward out of 9. So, living the brand versus pushing it in our face, which is really very cool. They do a lot of seasonal photos as well, kind of like Travel Alberta is another spectacular feed of gorgeous photography and user-generated content where they're transitioning through the seasons of the province, and you can tell it's winter the moment that you arrive on their feed, if in fact it is winter. Bar Body Studio. So Jamie, our marketing director, is an instructor here, and so we often, just admire all that they're up to there, and Jamie has helped with the marketing of this brand, which is really neat. But some of the things going on here, there's so many gorgeous images and very cool graphics. We talked in our content writing class about how Bar Body Studio does such a great job of telling the stories of their people. So their instructors, their regular, visitors, their suppliers and partners, just really showcasing and celebrating the users of their brand and the visitors to their studio and their staff. But also one of the images there in the top center is the owner Marlo doing her move of the week. So being filmed by her team, showing the move of that week, some kind of, 30-second or 60-minute video maybe on Instagram or Reels that is going to teach someone and educate them and inspire them, and also just give us a different type of content to lean into than just still imagery and maybe product shots. Warby Parker, so fun. This brand has, long been used and by long, I mean at least 5 years now, if that's long in the social media sphere, but as case studies of a really great mix, again, of real imagery and product shots with people, users, case studies, success stories, testimonials, and fun, bright, poppy colors that are really housed in blue, the color of their brand. In the second row on the left there, that video is quite cool because it doesn't just have a flat lay still shot of their latest glasses. It's a product video with no sound, just music background if you allow it to play, that is a product flat lay brought to life in a 10-second video. So it just adds so much more movement. And now when I scroll past that photo in my feed, I see these glasses come to life, and I can't help but stop because I want to see what the next one is and trying to find one that I relate to or like or want to click to see more of. But either way, they've caught our attention more than they would have if it was a still, and that alone is a win because, after all, we're competing for attention in these very busy social feeds, and anything to get someone to stop scrolling right by you is the goal. So, your turn. We are nearing the end here of module 1. In fact, we're at the end, and I want you to think about your own visual brand. We talked a lot about this in DIY graphic design, and again, hex codes for our colors and fonts and word marks and icons and stock photography. But now we're moving into our visual assets that are captured in photo and video, unique to us. So original photography that we can create and snap ourselves and build on an ongoing basis. Ideally, we're going to be doing this in batch shooting efforts so that we're not constantly out there trying to find photos. Not at all. We're going to write shot lists in the next module, and we're going to think about exactly the photo needs we have for the quarter or the month ahead, and then, let the content roll out as a result quite easily. So I want you to think about how you want to look and feel in the digital realm. What's working well for you currently if you're doing any photography? What do you think need work? Is it your, the brightness and the pop of your photos? Or is it just overall, the placements and the frequency that you're using photography in your brand promotions or marketing efforts? And then are there any rules of composition that you really love or that you think you could implement and focus on or crop into, and maybe describe those a little bit so that you're set up well for Module 2 when we hit your photo assignment. I will see you there, and we'll dive deeper into photography for social.